Okay, it's Thursday where you are. Where we are, it's still Monday afternoon. You are in a little different time slot than we're in. And you're at Thursday at noon 30, and we're Monday afternoon, a little bit after 5.
Right.
And so we're either if it's Thursday, we're either celebrating because Bernie Sanders has won the Wisconsin primary and gotten closer in the delegate count to Hillary Clinton, or we're bemoaning the fact that we're a little further behind. We don't know. You know, we don't know. You got one up on us.
Well, the percentages are in our favor. The polls seem to indicate that Bernie's going to pull this Wisconsin one through.
It looks good from where we're standing or sitting. It looks a lot more clear from where you, the audience, are.
Well, of course.
you have the answers that we do not have.
Right.
So we're speculating. We're postulating.
But there should be a limit to that because the answer is already out there for them when they're...
We can look forward. We can look forward and talk about, because we know we have on the next set of primaries that come up are on the 19th of this month, amongst them two very large ones, New York and Pennsylvania. We have our own Connecticut primary coming up on April 26th and some other ones that'll have a lot to say about who the candidate for the Democratic Party is for the office of President of the United States. And I think it's a good time, just in case we're not better off than we were on Monday when we're taping. just in case we're not as well off, and we're looking forward. I think it's very important to note that in every single hypothetical, grant you, but every single head-to-head matchup between Bernie Sanders and each and every one of the Republican candidates, most of them have fallen by the wayside, particularly Donald Trump and Ted Cruz. I'll leave John Kasich out because Kasich is the one that that is the best, in my opinion, of the Republican candidates. He's the most decent human being they have from day one, but definitely what they have left of the three candidates. But in every single head-to-head matchup, hypothetical matchup in polls, Bernie Sanders has done significantly, and when I say significantly, I say around 10% better head-to-head.
He's definitely the more viable candidate against any Republican.
Absolutely. And let's talk a little bit. Let's stray away from that point a little bit and look at supporters for Bernie Sanders in these primaries and supporters for Hillary Clinton in these primaries. And polls that they've taken show conclusively that amongst Clinton supporters, they all feel pretty good. They all feel pretty good about Bernie Sanders. If Bernie Sanders is the candidate, it's at this point, 83% of them are very happy with Bernie Sanders as a candidate.
Interesting. I can see the direction you're going in, and it's pretty intriguing because if Hillary were to win the primary, her ability to garner those Sanders supporters would not be as easy as Sanders would be able to garner the Hillary supporters. Am I moving in the direction that you were suggesting? It's
not as bad. It's not as bad as you would garner from reading. If you read online and then go to the comments section, and you get a lot of, people are protected when they make comments by their pseudonyms, and nobody knows who they are, and they could say the most ugly, despicable, angry rhetoric that they want to. They could throw it out there, and nobody knows who they are. Except for my cat. My cat knows every one of them by their names. But Basil. But so you get a lot of what sounds like Clinton supporters or people that purport to be Clinton supporters saying some horrible things about Bernie Sanders as a candidate, and you have a lot of people that purport to be Bernie Sanders supporters may or may not be actual Bernie Sanders supporters, because we have in the internet things called trolls. Troll is somebody that goes on a site specifically for the purpose of trying to bring everybody down, to make everybody depressed, to make people feel bad about the discussion, to feel bad about whoever their candidates that are in favor of.
So we have a skewed media, and we also have trolls.
Yeah. So, but getting back to the notion, you're right on about the fact that a larger percentage of Hillary Clinton supporters are very happy if they end up with Bernie Sanders as a candidate than Bernie Sanders supporters being happy when Hillary Clinton should be the candidate, if she is. It's not as bad as you might think. And are they cutting off their noses? Well, there you go. There's our good friend Roberto Perez, who's gives a lot of great guidance on the topic we're on. But I'll get to that in a moment, Roberto. But you're right about cutting off the nose to spite their face. But in the case of Clinton supporters, 83% of them, it seems like, are very happy if Bernie Sanders is a candidate. On the other end of the spectrum, it's Bernie Sanders supporters are about 70%. So the gap is not, the enthusiasm gap is not as huge as you would maybe expect it to be based on comments.
So you're saying 70% of Bernie supporters
would be okay.
Would be okay with Hillary?
Would be okay with Hillary. You may not see as...
In other words, they would kind of hold their nose and check it off?
I think the expression is choosing the lesser of two evils. But isn't everything in life...
That's not fair.
Isn't everything in life choosing the lesser of two evils? If we always have two choices, in any situation where we have two choices, one we would prefer, one we would not prefer.
When you say choosing the lesser of two evils, meaning Hillary or Trump, if such were the scenario.
You've got me there, absolutely. But let's rephrase that as choosing the greater of two goods.
That's probably...
Yeah. So in the case of Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton as a candidate, you hear the expression people going to the polls, and I'm going to go and I'm going to hold my nose and vote for... in 2004 was John Kerry. A lot of folks that didn't like John Kerry didn't think he was a very strong candidate. He wasn't passionate enough about issues like the war in Iraq. He was a Johnny-come-lately when it came to having voted for the war, and then when it became very popular to be against the war in Iraq, when the country shifted dramatically against the war in Iraq, the invasion and the occupation, Kerry reluctantly came along, pulled along by a candidate by the name of Howard Dean. So,
now,
go ahead.
Let's suppose that the young Bernie Sanders supporters are not as party conscious as prior generations.
Right.
So if they're not as prior conscious, and if they're not too concerned about allegiance to the Democratic Party, is Bernie Sanders on the ballot for the working families, or is he on? Does his name appear anywhere else in the voting booth? In
a word, no. But you brought that up in the past, and it's certainly. And I had a conversation with another friend of mine the other day, that the broker in my real estate office, who put that same hypothesis out there. What if the Republican convention becomes brokered, and regardless of who ends up being their candidate, the other guy, if it's Cruz that finds his way to being the candidate through a brokered convention, and the Trump people storm out and Trump ends up being an independent candidate, he probably at that point can get onto, I think, the ballots in all the states as a presidential candidate. Probably. I don't know, each state has their own arcane rules as far as getting on a general election ballot. But, so you would have...
You would have enough time to do it.
Yeah, you would. You would. I think you do. Almost certainly. People out there probably have a better grip on that than I do, but I think it's safe to say that you could. So let's say hypothetically the Republicans have their convention, and Cruz, who does not have enough delegates, ends up being the candidate.
Let's give the Republicans credit for a little bit more intelligence. Yeah. Let's say the Republicans at the brokered convention put Kasich up.
There you go. We'll get that would be the best candidate of the three. And in fact, as we alluded to on our show last night, he of the candidates they have left in hypothetical matchups. And John Kasich is a pretty good guy. I'll give him a lot of credit. He's an old-style Republican. He's not one of these whack jobs like these other guys, like the rest of the party leaders. And I'll say it and I'll stand by it. John Kasich, of all the candidates all along the way in hypothetical head-to-head matchups against either Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders, does the best of any of them. He doesn't beat Bernie Sanders, but he in some hypothetical head-to-head matchups, he beats Hillary Clinton because he is a candidate that I think people will respect a lot more than either Ted Cruz or certainly more than Donald Trump. So here we go. We get to a convention, and let's put Kasich to the side for a moment because I don't think a guy that has reasonable viewpoints has a chance to be their candidate, particularly if he's in third place as far as delegates go, particularly if he hasn't won the requisite 8 primaries and or caucuses. So the Republicans, let's say, they find a way to get past that first ballot with Trump not having the majority.
Well, they change the rules so they don't have to deal with it.
Yeah, one way or the other. Let's say Ted Cruz becomes a candidate. The Trump supporters storm out of the convention, probably loot and pillage Cleveland. And afterwards, he decides that those bad, mean Republican insiders stole away from me what's rightfully mine, and I'm going to be on the ballot as an independent. So now you've got a third candidate. Now you've got a Democratic Party
Republicans the Republicans would find that it's the old, do you poison yourself or do you shoot yourself in the head? I mean, I don't think the Republicans want that scenario. That's splitting the electorate. That's giving it to the Democrats.
Unless, as you alluded to, and as my good friend Scott, who's my broker in my office, alluded to the possibility of Bernie Sanders coming in as an independent candidate, and there being 4 candidates.
That's why I inquired from you earlier in the show whether or not the Republican convention predates the Democratic convention, because of that kind of split looks like it's going to materialize, and Bernie doesn't get the support from the superdelegates that he feels he's entitled to get
on a proportional basis, which he hasn't.
Then he splits from the Democrats, which is less likely than Trump splitting from the Republicans.
I think so. I think that's definitely much less likely that Bernie would run as an independent.
But he might get burned in a certain way. No pun intended. That would allow for that option. Then you would have the kind of election that the American people deserve.
The opportunity, let's say, might present itself where you have 2 people on the conservative side of the ledger, and the likelihood of having 2 people. Well, Hillary Clinton is decidedly socially liberal, but she's also decidedly corporate, and I think that's what people look at her and
There's
say.
There's also the trust factor.
Yeah. They say, well,
it's high. That
people say she's really no better than the Republicans on corporate
David,
issues.
67%. Feel that she can't be trusted. That's a large number.
And she creates a lot of that problem for herself, I believe. It's a lot of it is that she's been advertised against and battered so long for decades by Republicans and by right-wing Republicans principally, that some of that dirt's going to stick whether it's true or not. Did she kill 50 people, including Vince Foster? No. We know that's if I can say it on television, bullshit. I guess I said it so.
Well, then of course there's Clinton's pardoning of Mark Rich.
But every president pardons people. Every outgoing president pardons people that the other party looks at and says, "Oh my God, look at the guy pardoned the devil incarnate." So, but
Why?
There we end up. There we end up with the possibility of 4 viable candidates in the election, and that hasn't happened in America since I believe 1860, which was the year that we were heading into a civil war. Anyway, the country was not just culturally divided, but was very close to being physically divided. States going one direction, and states staying. The northern states staying as northern states, and the southern states seceding and attempting to begin their own country. So, we had, and of course Abraham Lincoln was the reason why he was probably, in that election, he was probably equally disliked to the point that Donald Trump is now. A lot of voters hated Abraham Lincoln because they saw him as the guy that was going to end slavery. They saw him as an abolitionist, even though he really wasn't. Abraham Lincoln understood that the chief duty of the President of the United States is to preserve and protect the Union.
Interesting, because slavery is it's an intriguing term.
Yeah.
Okay, people can be suffering from various forms of slavery. Lincoln was capable of liberating humanity physically from slavery.
Yeah.
It's conceivable that the American way of life, in a sense, could be the slave, right, of the corporate financial. So you get somebody like Bernie Sanders in there, and it's another way.
I see the point you're making.
Liberating the country from a form of slavery.
Although, with all deference to people at that time that happened to be black,
right,
and their descendants who have heard about, as we all hopefully have, heard about what slavery was really like, what we have now is closer to what you would call indentured servitude, which is not slavery.
No.
Not slavery.
Indentured servitude.
You go home poor every night, and you go home with limited prospects, but you don't have shackles around your arms and legs.
No, these things have to be understood in terms of degree.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so the essential liberation was essential. However, despite that, you still had the Jim Crow laws. You still had second-class citizens throughout the country. Yeah. Blacks being marginalized. You needed another movement. You needed the civil rights movement. All right, that propelled it a little further.
Which was a great time in American history. I grew up in that. That was where I the story goes, cut my political teeth. I saw Dr. Martin Luther King standing up and taking a chance day after day with his life, and going up against both sides of the equation. I mean, he had leaned heavily on both Southerners, on at that time the racist Dixiecrats, the Southern Democrats, who later became Republicans, and he leaned on the Republicans at the time who were more socially progressive, more socially liberal. Edward Brooke, black senator from Massachusetts, Republican. At that point, and that's what led me to register as a Republican to begin with. When I registered, because it was in that transitional time when the Republican Party and Richard Nixon was reaching out and said, come on over, we could use you. And for decades, that's exactly what the Republican Party has done.
And they went through a change. I think with Newt Gingrich.
Yeah.
Newt Gingrich brought that whole contract with America.
Well, I call it contract on America, but contract with America. Yeah, that was the term. Yeah,
that seemed to change the ideology somewhat, and that does go. And the parties do go through a transformation, and then they won that midterm election.
Yeah,
and then they went through another transition when the Tea Party movement infected the Republican Party.
And I think that's a fair choice of words, that really, in fact, did infect the Republican Party. It did infect the Republican Party. And now they're reaping, in a biblical sense, they're reaping what they've sowed.
Right. There's a bit of chaos.
Yeah,
in
they
the Republican
went
Party.
for these people, and little by little over the decades, these Tea Party activists who are really, in fact, the Dixiecrats of old have evolved into the Tea Party and the racist side of the Tea Party, because libertarians get lumped in with Tea Party members, and libertarians are very different. They're not racists.
Unfortunately, the whole libertarian movement has been soiled by the Koch brothers.
Yeah.
So it's hard to find what you would call clean politics anywheres.
Yeah.
Even the Democratic Party, for that matter, has been tainted with money.
Money's become more of a factor, and that's the central term. That's one of the central focuses of the Bernie Sanders campaign, and I think it's an important one. There are other ones, obviously. There's income equality, and as a nation, we're beginning to head in that direction. We may never get to income equality, but we're getting the small steps toward that. California just passed a law that gradually brings California up to $15 an hour as a threshold, as a minimum wage.
Well, the argument is you put the minimum wage in, the living wage, you raise it to $15 an hour. It has to be over a certain period of time. And then the cost of goods and services rise proportionately, and people find themselves in the same hole again.
And yet,
how do you deal with that?
That's the argument, and yet it doesn't happen that way, because if you're spreading the cost of one of my least friendly service providers, McDonald's, least liked service providers, McDonald's, if you say roughly double the salary of employees that work for McDonald's, you would see a very small increase in the cost. Your dollar.
So your hamburger is not going to cost that much more.
Yeah, your dollar hamburger is going to be $1.05. Because it's spread across an entire populace of people.
And that's probably the analogy you can use in most cases.
And folks that have gained the at least a foothold on enough money so they're not beholden to taxpayers for health care, for housing assistance, because they just don't make enough money to survive.
Right. A lot of them at this point, the argument was that jobs at McDonald's and Burger King, these were sort of intermediary jobs that they were for kids going to college.
That's the argument, and yet we know that's not the case.
It's not the case. The job situation is critical in the country, thanks to all the. Well, I don't say I don't mean thanks, but because of the outsourcing.
Yeah. There's certain jobs that you can't outsource. You can't outsource a guy that puts together a hamburger.
Right.
You can't outsource a plumber. You can't outsource a carpenter. You can't. There's most everything that our people do. You can't outsource a nurse job. You can't outsource a teacher. Well, you might be able to partially using internet. You could outsource some of teaching.
You can outsource some areas of the food industry through robotics.
Yeah, but you can't outsource very much of it. So that argument doesn't really wash. It doesn't really affect giving people a living wage, and I think living wage is a much preferable term to minimum wage.
Correct.
Because a living wage provides a family with enough money, food, clothing, decent shelter.
The basics.
Transportation to and from work, even if that's by bus, at least gives people an opportunity to work a reasonable amount of hours, spend the time with their families, and that's for you family values, folks. You want parents to be home with their kids as much as possible, and when one of them is working 60 hours a week and the other one's working 40 or 50 hours a week, it's very difficult.
Just at this point, the second Bill of Rights of FDR, it was brought to the fore by Bernie Sanders in one of his speeches. That's the Georgetown University speech.
Yeah.
Okay. and it reads, true individual freedom cannot exist without economic security and independence. People in necessity are not independent or free. Freedom equates with economic security. All right, so basically...
I don't think anybody in the audience, no matter where you are on the political spectrum, I don't think anybody in the audience could disagree with that.
No, it's economic security is a prerequisite for freedom. You're not free without it.
Right.
And you can't have it unless you have a living wage. So, it stands to reason that if people are not given a living wage, they're kept out of their freedom is being infringed upon in a modern society.
And in order to sell products produced here in the United States, you have to have an audience. You have to have somebody to buy those products. And I always like coming back to the notion that Henry Ford had. Now, he had his problems with unions, and he had his thugs come in and kill quite a few union members from time to time. But Henry Ford understood the fact that in order to make more of his product, he needed to have his workers had to be able to buy a Ford.
And they had to buy the Ford, even if he sold it to them at an extremely reduced rate, because he had to get that product on the market. He had to have the general public seeing the product in relation to the horse and carriage.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's the fact that it was out there and being perceived was a marketing tool.
Absolutely.
Even if it was a lost lead, it's necessary to promote his business. What do you say?
We're going to come back next week. Again, we're you know better than we do what happened in Wisconsin. We're hoping that we narrowed the delegate lead down from 238 down a little closer to 200. We obviously have to do really well in New York. We have to do well in California. We have to do well in Connecticut, Pennsylvania. We have to continue to do better. But the arc of history, to quote Dr. King, the arc of history is on our side. Momentum is ours, and we are getting closer. Will we get there? Our hard work and our efforts will tell us.
Bernie's looking good in New York, David. Bernie's looking very good in New York.
Grew up in the Bronx. Partly Brooklyn. Correct myself on that. He grew up in Brooklyn. And Clinton currently lives in Westchester.
But she's got her office in Brooklyn. I think he's got his in Brooklyn too.
Wrap it up.
Okay.
Can I go home?
We'll come back another time and talk about the second Bill of Rights that Franklin Roosevelt put forward. We'll continue to talk about great Republican presidents that we wish we had back. Teddy Roosevelt. We had Dwight Eisenhower was a pretty good one, and along with some great Democratic presidents. And,
I like
go for the issues rather than for the party.